Hi, I'm Heather Staines, Senior Consultant for Delta Think and a longtime Charleston Conference Director. It's my pleasure to be here today with James Daunt, the CEO for Barnes& Noble, to talk a little bit about his past, his present, and the future of library, bookseller, and publisher relations. Welcome, James.
Thank you for having me.
So to kick us off a little bit, maybe you can talk a bit about your very first bookshop and how that set you off on a career as a bookseller.
Oh goodness, I opened my first bookshop when I was really quite young. I think I was 24 years old when I left my first job, which obviously I'd barely started, and set about opening a bookstore in central London. It was a small independent. I obviously didn't have very much money. We spread the books in the store extremely thinly. Everything was spaced out. Um, uh, I called it very unimaginatively after myself. It's called Daunt Books. And the only unusual thing about it is that we arranged all the books by country. So that is novels, histories, biographies, everything by the country in which it was about or placed. And that created something very different to the chain booksellers, who obviously are arranged by subject and then generally alphabetized within that. So we were a very different sort of a bookstore, and happily very successful.
And that store soon expanded to multiple locations, and then you took on more responsibility for other chains. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that happened?
Yes, I mean, we did open new stores. I think really I sat in the first one I'd opened and never moved from there. And my booksellers, I think, sort of one after another, got sort of pretty fed up with me, and wanted their own. And so we sort of steadily opened, another shop to accommodate them, and people went off and did their own stores. And by the time sort of 2010, 11 had come along, I had six bookstores. And meanwhile, in the rest of the book world, sort of Armageddon was happening. Amazon obviously had launched in the United Kingdom in 2000, and the plethora of chains, including Borders, which obviously American listeners will know, but there were a lot of homegrown bookstore chains. They all went bankrupt one after another, until we were just left really with Borders. And then a couple of others, Foyles, famously Blackwell's, which is an academic bookseller. But Waterstones dominated it all. They got into big trouble, and a businessman and I, sort of Russian businessman, rather alarming sounding these days, but was not then. Thought it was worth rescuing, and he put up the money, and I got busy with it, and he bought Waterstones, and we set about turning it around.
And you used, when we're preparing for this call, the term bookseller. So when I say bookseller, what comes to your mind, and how is a bookseller different from someone who just happens to work in a bookshop?
A book selling is a vocational commitment, I think. It is, I think, aligned to, but different to that of being a librarian. People do it because they believe in the vocation, and in our case, that is to curate our stores as intelligently and attractively as possible, to be, I think, very democratic environments. Obviously, not as welcoming and democratic as a library is, which generally will lend you the book for nothing. We sell you the book, but equally, anyone can come into the store. They can spend as long as they like. We appeal to people of all ages, where I think the heart of a bookstore is its children's section, in particular the young adult one. Kids coming in after school, sitting on the floors, chatting away, looking at books. It's our place within the community, which is at the heart of what we do. But the skills of a bookseller are around curation and presentation, how you select the books that you carry, and how you present them, and how you organize them, and the skill with which you do that will determine how intellectually interesting your bookstore is. And then the service you give the friendliness and the welcome that you give will determine the atmosphere. And it's that combination of the two which creates great bookstores.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about your career at Barnes and Noble. When you were kind of initially approached to kind of take on this responsibility, as you mentioned, lots of bookstores were struggling in the wake of Amazon. Was it a tough decision? What did they say to convince you? What was your thought process like in moving into the new role?
Well, it was slightly different. We been very successful in turning around Waterstones, which had gone from bankruptcy to being a growing and profitable business, and a happy and successful one. At the same time, obviously, we could see in the United States that Barnes and Noble was continuing to decline. Store numbers were dropping, profits were dropping, sales were dropping. Everything was not looking too good. Cycling through quite a few CEOs, one after another. It was clearly in big trouble. And the same principle which had brought me to Waterstones, sorry, excuse me, the same principle that had brought me to Waterstones, which was a desire to keep these bookstores in communities. Waterstones was the last major chain in the United Kingdom, Barnes and Noble the last major chain in the United States. The motivation is to keep those bookstores there. So we actually, our owner sold to a US, though London-based, a US private equity investor with the express desire to then see what we could do to turn around Barnes and Noble. So it was very much with that in mind, and indeed, they then bought Barnes and Noble, which was a public company at that point, and I took over again with the express purpose of reinvigorating the bookstores, stemming the loss of sales, getting it back into growth, starting to open new stores again. That's the mission.
And I'm a historian, not a business person, but when we, got together to chat, prior to this call, you talked about how thinking about the different Barnes and Noble locations in terms of like quartiles and how well they were doing, or what kind of momentum they had, helped the strategy focus. Can you talk a little bit about how you worked with the stores that were in sort of different circumstances?
Yeah, the key principle that I brought to Waterstones and now to Barnes and Noble is that each store has to be run by its own store team, and that store team will be able to engage with its community much more dynamically than central direction can ever achieve. And therefore, we stopped all of the central direction of what books you place where, which was the heart, really, the foundation of the old Barnes and Noble method, because they sold the placement of books to publishers. That's how they made their money. So every single table in every single Barnes and Noble would have the same books on it in the same place, and there was dollars attached to that. The same model as at Waterstones before I joined. We replaced that with something where we leave the display decisions, the curation of the store entirely in the hands of the store team. And we seek to encourage the principles behind good book selling so that they are able to do it better and better. What happens in practice at the initial stages is that roughly a quarter of them start doing it brilliantly. About another half of them don't really change a great deal. And then quarters start doing it really badly, and they mess their stores up big time. But again, we don't seek to correct that from the center. What we do is we group all our stores in what we call clusters, 5 or 6 stores. Generally, within 5 or 6 stores, you'll have some good ones and some bad ones. And then we encourage the local good ones, and you're good because your sales are going up, to help and encourage and nurture and support the bad ones. And they know they're bad because their sales will be going down. Therefore, it's somebody from your local community, same accent as you, understands your challenges, who is there to help you, rather than somebody coming from quote unquote corporate with all of their sort of rather homogenizing ways. And it gets you. It's a much nicer way to manage people. I think it's a much gentler way, and it's a much more effective way.
Thank you. Now we're recording this in December 2023, but so a little more than a month ago, you spoke at the Charleston conference. I believe it was your first time to attend. How did you find it, and what would you say to others who are thinking of attending?
It was large. So I had not been expecting that. An enormous number of people. And you know, I think that booksellers are a tribe of people. You can walk into a room of lots of publishers and other people, and you'll recognize the bookseller. I think publishers are tribes and librarians are tribes. Again, what was interesting to me was that it's a mix. It's not just librarians. That there was a really sort of inspiring mix of people from sort of across our industry, obviously dominated by librarians and the focus upon that as a profession and an ethos, which I think all of us who are not librarians do find, particularly as inspiring. And it was just really fun to be amongst like-minded people, discussing what are extremely challenging and topical issues, which should be of key concern to all of us, and not just to librarians. So it was the scale, I suppose, and the focus that was most inspiring.
Yeah, so we had, I think, a little more than 2,000 in-person attendees this year. So for our library viewers, not an American Library Association size meeting, but sizable and very impressive as well. You mentioned to me earlier that reading and traveling are your hobbies. What kinds of places do you like to travel? And when you're traveling, do you visit bookstores there?
I travel widely and enjoy traveling. We travel as a family. We particularly like former Soviet countries. They have they tend to have an authenticity and a lack of development, which makes them much more enjoyable places or for us at least. So everywhere from Ethiopia to Nicaragua, Georgia, not your Georgia, the Caucasian Georgia, the Stans, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, and so on. So we travel extremely widely. Yes, but there aren't many bookstores in those kind of places. But I do sort of look out for them. If you find that little bookseller in a back street of Istanbul or wherever one might be. But I also travel professionally and find that extraordinary as well. Japan, I think, is one of the most exhilarating countries in which to travel, both from the enjoyment of the society and the culture, but also because the bookstores are and retail generally is amazing. And the Far East as a whole has a level of curation and execution and presentation from which we can all learn. Japan is top for me, but Korea, Taiwan, China also. And then within Europe, the Italians are still the masters. So always whenever I can, I go to Italy.
Excellent. I actually have lived in Japan a couple of times, and going to bookstores was one of my great activities to do. Not only to have books to read, but to see the local community and just to try to get some books in Japanese that I might be able to read. I really appreciate in Japan how when folks are reading, I'm assuming they're still reading print books, but they would cover a lot of their books in public, both from a privacy standpoint, but also from a care and maintenance of keeping the books, in nice shape. So I appreciated that there.
The attention to detail is astonishing, but also what's astonishing to me is that a bookstore everywhere in the world is basically the same thing.
Yeah, no, you studied history. I mentioned I studied history, and I believe you have a daughter who's also studying history. What would you say? I mean, humanities are kind of under attack in many areas. Business degrees are maybe more highly at least promoted. But a lot of folks studying in the humanities, are out there as well, doing wonderfully. Would you say there was anything in particular about studying history that affected your kind of outlook today, or how you understand the world around you?
Well, I fully appreciate that everybody's brain is different and everybody is energized and fulfilled by different things. The scientists by the science, and but those of us who are focused on the humanities, and clearly being a poet is very different from being a historian. I do believe that if for one's best development and best enjoyment, finding one's passion is really important, whether it's one's passion academically and intellectually. In my case, I still read history all the time and still find myself sort of enthralled by it. But it's the important thing is to find what it is that you truly enjoy. And if may be naive, and I clearly respect those who find themselves thinking otherwise. But money in itself is not remotely satisfying. It's those things which support you intellectually, personally, and allow you to live a rich and fulfilling life. And that really does matter intellectually as well. So for me, that's history, but I quite understand that there is somebody who finds chemistry and biology and all those incomprehensible things that one did at school equally enthralling, but not me.
Yeah, I was excited when you told me that one of the benefits of your role and your role throughout your life has been that you can read a book and call it working. There's many folks who are going to be listening to this who will be in the same situation. You also got very excited when you talked about the importance of first novelists. Can you tell us a little bit about how you think that is really key to continuing the book selling tradition?
It's an interesting thing to me. I mean, logically, we ought to, at least from a fiction perspective, but actually across many other subjects, philosophy, whatever it might be, we probably ought to have a store that has, you know, the modern classic library and the ancient classic library, and be done with that. I mean, if you haven't read all of Jane Austen and all of Faulkner and all of the rest of the great works, why on earth would you be picking up a just published novel? But the reality is that the discovery of the new is hugely inspiring, and whether that's the new play, the new music, concert, the new whatever it is in the sphere of culture. You know, we like going to exhibitions and things. We don't just want to tramp around the same sort of classic paintings and sculpture. But for us, fiction is at the sort of heart of what we do for adults, and new novels are probably the most thrilling part of that. New novels, and also those novelists who've published good books, but and promised great books. And when the great book comes, how amazing that is. I've just read a book by somebody, an author called Carrie Davis, who's written few, but her new one is called Clear, and it's just breathtakingly good. And that is just, it's so exciting when one finds those books.
Wonderful. And a last question, I want to look a little bit to the future. In the United States, libraries are under a lot of pressure. They're under financial pressure. They're under pressure from the culture wars, depending on where they are, you know, in the country. You mentioned that in the UK, where you're calling from today, that libraries have over time been treated rather poorly. How can we turn this situation around, you know, with libraries to put them in a more favorable spot?
Well, certainly, the role of the library within communities, public libraries as well as academic libraries, is, I mean, really of inestimable importance. And I mean, I'm of a vintage that was lucky enough to grow up with a very good public library system, and personally availed of it. And without it, I wouldn't have been able to progress intellectually, I think, in the way that I have been able to. These are safe spaces, they're places of development, they are places that support a broadening of thought and an engagement with words. Why are politicians have choosing to ignore the really pitifully small amounts of money that are required to sustain the library system is something that I find baffling. I think it's upon us, those of us who can campaign and articulate the importance of libraries, and to pressure politicians to support them. It is the most infinitesimally small part of the overall budget to run our societies, and to ignore the library is a tragedy. In the United Kingdom, it does seem to be much worse than it is in the United States. But in the United States, libraries are also under huge pressure. And as you've said, from a cultural sort of wars perspective, I mean, both countries, the library and we ourselves as bookstores as well, on the fringes of this, being caught up in this drive by interested parties, actually on both spectrums of the political extreme, to try and curtail what it is that we hold and what which we present. And that is really invidious and should be resisted by everybody.
Well, thank you so much for taking your time to come speak with us in Charleston in person last month, and for taking time to speak with us in a little bit more detail today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.